This week on the show, we are going to be presenting a webinar that occurred on July 17th, 2025, between Alec Trunley, Brand Partnerships Director at RedCircle, and our very own Dan Christo, COO at the Podglomerate. This webinar is all about how to deliver, evaluate, and rebook a great ad read. In short, a lot of podcasters are very focused on trying to monetize their show, but it is very rare that one of these podcasters thinks about these sponsorships from the brand side. What are you delivering as a podcaster? What does the brand see? What does the brand get out of it? And why would they come back? In this fireside chat, Dan and Alex are going to walk you through the secrets of crafting successful ad reads that advertisers actually want to rebook. Alec helps top-tier advertisers scale host reads across hundreds of shows at RedCircle, and Dan has helped unlock nearly $3 million for Podglomerate's monetization clients. This deep dive reveals the advertiser perspective that most creators never see, giving you the competitive edge to transform your ad reads from one-time deals into recurring revenue. In this session, Dan and Alec will talk about what makes your ad irresistible to sponsors, how advertisers evaluate your ad's performance behind the scenes, which metrics actually matter for securing future campaigns, and the most common mistakes that they see when podcasters are delivering sponsored content. And now let's get right to the webinar.
Today we're going to talk about how to deliver, evaluate, and rebook a great ad read, and talk more broadly about relationships in general between sponsors and publishers. My name is Dan Christo. I'm the COO at the Podglomerate. We produce, grow, and monetize podcasts. And my co-host today, Alec, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'm Alec. I do brand partnerships. I handle a lot of the major agency and brand relationships for RedCircle and the hundreds of shows that we represent there. Basically, the main goal there is to find the brands and the podcasters that are the best fits for each other and match them up and create those successful long-term partnerships. That's the game, really, right?
Always the never-ending game. But yeah, thanks, Alec, and thank you to RedCircle for their partnership and putting this together alongside with our Podglomerate team too. So really grateful to have them as sponsors and partners. And also, just full disclosure too, we are clients of RedCircle, so we do have a working relationship outside of this, just so everyone's aware. But today we're going to go through, we have a bunch of cool questions and prompts that are really informed by our own experience. So Alec being very involved on the sales side, although I'm the COO at the Podglomerate, I also run the monetization department. So I've been deep in the weeds since 2019 and seen an evolution of the market over the last 6 years, really now, how dramatically it's changed. So we're going to take you through some prompts initially for about a half hour. Hopefully we get through everything. And then at the end, the back half hour or so, we'll have time for questions. So feel free to put your questions in the chat. We have some very helpful helpers that are going to organize them and let us know. So feel free to fire those away. And then at the end, after Alec and I are done, we'll go through some of those questions for you. So without further ado, kick it off. Our first topic here, what makes a podcast ad read successful from an advertiser's perspective? And Alec, I was hoping that you could share a couple specific examples of any ad reads that worked really well for you guys in the past.
Yeah, 100%. So I think for podcast advertising specifically, or advertising in general, obviously the goal of the brand is to increase sales, right? They're trying to increase their revenue. It's all about, unfortunately or fortunately, it's all about money. So if you get an ad deal from a brand, you've just been hired to be a new salesperson for this brand, basically. And they're going to evaluate how well you do at your job using promo codes and pixels to figure out if it was successful or unsuccessful. Basically would just mean like, was it profitable or unprofitable for this brand to work with you? The best examples I have are, the reality is like, you're going to get a test from this advertiser and they're going to commit a certain amount of money to a certain amount of episodes or flights with you to figure out whether or not it is a good partnership, whether it can be profitable, whether you are going to do a good job for them. And if you don't get more brand deals from this advertiser, the reality is that you probably didn't drive the revenue that it costs to work with you. The ones that go long-term, when you get an annual deal, you're clearly helping that brand increase their revenue, increase their sales. and, you're getting support for your podcast to do what you love to do, for the next, 12 months. So, those are kind of like the basics of how these brands are testing into podcasting and how you can work with them long term. It is about driving sales at the end of the day.
Right. And sometimes it's hard to understand that when you're first starting off the relationship, what are those conversion metrics? What really drives sales for you? A lot of times it's, sponsors are a little reticent to give that information away because it could give away leverage in the negotiation. But what we'd like to see ideally is really focusing on long-term partnerships. Although we get focused on the deal in front of us, the long-term partnership is where the publisher and the brand really, really win. And then all the intermediaries in the middle, like us, kind of can just get out of the way and let everyone do their work. One great example that we had over here at Podglomerate was a show called Armchair Explorer, which is a fantastic travel show. And they did a small test campaign, as Alec mentioned, just a traditional sort of host-read DAI for a month or two, just to see if there's any kind of audience engagement. And then they stopped the campaign, but then later in the year, it had tested pretty well. And they ended up sponsoring custom episodes. So that's a bit of an outlier. And it's almost a best case scenario where you're going from an audio specific ad and it's blossoming into a more 360 or a different type of relationship. So you're not just selling directly on the podcast inventory, but you're kind of selling elsewhere in the ecosystem that you're building. That one was really great, but the core of that ad read and the core of that ad success was really the authenticity. So Aaron, did this read for a travel company, Amtrak company, train. So they were advertising on just broadly what the Amtrak services were, but Aaron had used them a lot, and he put a lot of his own experience and kind of how he talks in the podcast into the initial ad read. And that's what really caught the sponsor's ear and made them think about, sort of expanding the relationship that way.
Yeah, and that's exactly the right way to look at it, is like, how can we make sure this test performs well so we can extend it into the rest of the year, but then also how can we ratchet it up? How can we get more involved with each other to build a better relationship, and for one, so that the brand can increase their revenue, and for you as a publisher to make cooler and more exciting ad reads that don't feel repetitive, that can be custom, that you can really have fun with. Because those are the ones that also perform even better as you have more room to be creative. Kind of like the sky's the limit in terms of how much revenue you can drive to your partner's website, and also you're now delivering, depending on what you're working on. It could be a fintech company. Maybe it's a really educational custom segment where you're delivering education to your audience around a specific financial topic, but also driving traffic to the sponsor's website. Or on the other hand, it could just be like a really entertaining ad read. I've been lucky to work with some like pretty popular podcasters, people like Joe Rogan and Dax Shepard. And the one thing that's like the through line through all of their ads is like, they're never boring ads. They're very engaging ads, and they love the product, and they can talk for 7 minutes plus about how amazing, like, the one thing that was like the reason it was hard to work or hard to get an ad read on Joe Rogan's podcast, because he almost always says no, not a good fit. I'm not comfortable endorsing. I can't speak authentically about this product because I don't use it. I've tried it. We send them samples, not interested. But once he got a brand that he was obsessed with, MeUndies is a good example. He like threw away all of his underwear and filled the drawer with MeUndies, and it was all he wore, and he talked about it all the time, and he crushed it for MeUndies all the time.
Yeah.
And it was because, one, up front, is really hesitant to commit to a partnership where he's not bought in, where he doesn't feel like it's authentic to him. And then two, he is so educated on the product because he loves it, because he uses it, because he's tried it. Could talk endlessly about it as if he was talking to a friend, right? Like, and another kind of through line to that is like, sometimes you feel people rushing. Oh, I got to like fit everything into 60 seconds. And like, the reality is the data says that like longer ad reads perform like better and better the longer that they go, almost to like no end. And that's he's doing 7-minute ad reads. Is that like the best listener experience? Like, maybe not. People are going to skip, but the people who are going to buy are listening, and they remain listening for 7 minutes straight. So
yeah, you hit on a lot of really interesting points there that I think we'll probably pull apart in a little more detail later on too.
Yeah.
But just for context, I don't think we shared initially on the call that between us, our organizations and us individually, we work from shows. Not everyone's Joe Rogan, right? But what we're giving you is really universal, and what we've seen shows all the way from 500 downloads a month up to 500,000 downloads to 5 million downloads a month. Between RedCircle and Podglomerate, hundreds of shows. We have a lot of experience all the way up and down the spectrum, whether you're episodic, focusing on episodic, daily show, seasonal. We've kind of done it all genres. So what we're trying to give you today is really sort of those universal nuggets that are, transferable across whatever your show might be. And I think a lot of things you were touching on there, Alec, were to kind of touch back on authenticity. That's unique to everyone. So sponsors will sometimes they give you a script. Oftentimes there are guidelines, or there's a section where you can put your own flavor on it. And part of it too is really just understanding that, what is your audience? How do you relate to them? If you're remaining consistent in who you are and how you're engaging with your audience, that's going to flow through to the advertisement as well. So it's not about, changing yourself to necessarily fit what the brand is asking specifically for, but it's really leveraging, your own connection with your audience and trying to translate, what their message is to them. So what that means for somebody who's speaking about, sports and mattresses may be very different than someone who's speaking about politics and, trying to sell some sort of medication. So really the comps matter a lot, but at the end of the day, if you just stay true to yourself and try to speak to your audience about the product, like it's something that you want to talk to them about, it'll come very naturally to you, and that's giving yourself the best chance of conversions there.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's also something we'll talk about later. And it's like, not every partnership that looks amazing on paper works, right? Like it does. Sometimes there's just things that don't work out well. If every partnership ends up never becoming a long-term one, there's things we could dig into to figure out why. But sometimes just things just don't work, even if it looks like a perfect fit. Yeah.
And the opposite is true. Sometimes you get a really weird opportunity that you don't think is going to work, and then it tests through the roof, and that's getting lucky, but it does happen.
And that's why we test, right? Test everything. And
so I want to move us through to kind of one of our next big topics here is talking about how advertisers are evaluating the ad performance after it runs. So we kind of just talked about maybe how to make it a little bit better as you're sculpting the ad, but after they get some data, after you see that test, how are we looking at that? Put us in the advertiser's shoes, if you can, Alec, for a minute here, whether it's the advertiser or their representative at an agency, most of the time for some of these bigger buyers. How are they looking at the ad's performance? Are there metrics? Are there timing decisions? How are they thinking about that?
Yeah, it's something that I said at the beginning about like what makes a successful ad read, which is like, did the campaign make money? It is usually that simple at the end of the day. It's kind of a yes or no question around, the advertiser looking at how much they spent on the ad reads and how much revenue that was generated as a result. And that gives you a very simple formula to figure out whether or not you can afford to continue spending money working with this podcaster, or if you need to, turn towards other tests, try something else. So that's usually like top level North Star, what the marketer is looking at. But there's other considerations. Obviously, it's not always just cost versus return, because there can be factors around, traffic. Maybe we're driving amazing traffic. The ad read crushed. We drive amazing traffic. And at some point in the customer journey, which we can see through the pixel, someone just like abandons cart, or it's really common that they're like abandoning cart at the same point. There's a case to be made that at a certain point, the customer is once we've passed them off to the brand, it's now the brand's opportunity to win or lose that customer. The one other consideration around that is like, it's not just you in isolation in a vacuum. You are quote unquote competing for this budget with all the other podcasters. And like, you can drive a ton of traffic and people can abandon cart, and another podcast cannot drive as much traffic, but generate a lot of revenue. And like, at the end of the day, they've won and they're going to get the renewal and you may not. So it is difficult, because what are we going to ask them to like completely redo their landing page just for us. It's not always a realistic ask, but it shows a lot of promise. And that's when, a good ad rep or, showrunner can jump in and say like, the creative was amazing. They went above and beyond in terms of like the personalization. They clearly love the product. We can see that the traffic was amazing. Let's, quote unquote, retest. Let's try it one more time with a little bit of frequency, with a little bit of like revamped direction around, because there's also, there's 3 ad reads in a test oftentimes, and they're not always the same. And there's something about, after 1, 2, and 3, out of those 3, one of them drove more traffic than the other. And you can figure that out if you have an open line of communication with the brand and double down on that ad read, the theme of that ad read. Maybe you talk specifically about a story about how that brand worked in your life, and the other 2 ad reads, you focus more on reading the copy and focusing on the benefits. You can learn from that and, take that advertiser's perspective in terms of testing and double down and focus more on what worked the first time. So there's a lot of considerations, and that's a lot of information to go over. But at the end of the day, it really does come down to that like profitable or unprofitable equation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of information, but a lot of really great concentrated information. So please take note of everything Alec just ran through. But yeah, to kind of zoom back out for a second, yes, at the end of the day, if you think about how any advertising purchase gets made, down to media purchasing, down to digital media, down to podcasts, down to the audio assets specific to the podcast, which is what we're talking about today. There is a very large ecosystem and infrastructure built here for how things get purchased and how those decisions are made. And that's really what Alec touched on in the first point, where the conversion metrics need to be there, because they're not even really competing. You're not competing against other shows. You're competing against the other cost of acquisition for clients in any other advertising channel that could exist. So you're fighting for budget. And this is how anyone who's making these decisions, this is their job. This is how they keep their job. They need to be making good decisions with their budget or with their client's budget, if we're talking about an agency. So it may appear very reductive from our chair, from the publisher's chair, to say, I did a great ad read, we had some good traffic. It's all kind of relative. And as you build relationships with people, you get to understand some folks are really good about it and will let you know, hey, like it's going well, but we can't afford it at this price here. Now, of course, some of that's always negotiating, but that's maybe where if you're used to getting a $25 CPM, maybe you take a $22 CPM in order to get the deal done. And that's part of that back and forth in the partnership. But yeah, what they're really going to look at is, I view things in kind of a stoplight fashion. So, green, yellow, red. Red, the conversion ratios were terrible. I'm not looking at that again. Green, that's really great. We're going to keep hammering that to try to find our point of diminishing marginal returns on that initial investment or on that podcast or on this whole media buy that we're doing. And then yellow, it could have been better. Now let's dig into the details here. And a lot of everything that Alec just spoke to is really about that yellow section, where there's a lot you can do that can put yourself in the best position to when you're talking about this with an advertiser. And most of the time, you either have someone like myself or Alec talking to another agent, another intermediary, and so we understand the vocabulary a little bit more. But very broadly, the point of context that Alec brought up is great. If you have 3 ad reads, how is each ad read different than the other? What was happening in that time of the year that may have contributed to a change in listening activity in general? And also, if something is relevant to a season, if it's Oscar season or if it's Mother's Day or Father's Day, like certain ads are going to perform a little bit more strongly or weakly depending on what's happening in the world around us. So those are important facts that when you're in that yellow section and you're sort of fighting for the renewal or fighting for the relationship, it's important to really put yourself in the shoes of the person on the other side of the phone or email most of the time these days, and try to give them as much information that could help explain why things maybe didn't go the way you wanted to initially. So I think super high level, takeaway being conversion metrics are sort of the be all end all, but there is a lot of opportunity if you present your case nicely and thoughtfully, with their best interest at heart. Then we do historically see a lot of people that even if we don't get the green light on that next deal, they remember that. They remember you. They remember that you're trying to be thoughtful about things. And it might not be a no, but it might just be a not right now. And they come back to you in a few months. Let that audience kind of simmer and get some new people listening to the show, that sort of thing. But I can prattle on about that all day. I'll keep us moving. Is there one question that we kind of touched on it, Alec, but is there any difference between vanity metrics and sort of actionable metrics from an advertiser standpoint?
I'm sorry, can you ask the question again? The vanity metrics from the advertiser perspective?
Yeah, is there anything, well, I'm kind of leading you a little bit, but for instance, like downloads,
don't get me in
impressions.
Trouble.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just kidding.
Downloads, impressions, traffic, conversion ratio. Like, are there any metrics that we really shouldn't be paying much attention to versus things that are super important?
When I think about like taking the perspective of the advertiser, right? Let's say I have a set amount of budget and I want to reach as many people as possible. So I reach out to a publisher and they say like, oh, we have 100,000 impressions available. That sounds, that's great. I'd love to reach 100,000 people. And then you get into the details and it's like, oh, it's not actually 100,000 people. It's 50,000 people hearing the same ad twice, or 25,000 people hearing the same ad 4 times. Like, those have different values from an advertiser's perspective, because at the end of the day, yes, frequency is important. We want to reach people a few times. People are not typically responding to calls to action immediately after one time. You want to build frequency, but those are important considerations 100% from an advertiser's perspective, is the unique reach of the podcast, and how many humans are there to go on their phone and test out this product, to act on the call to action. Because if I'm doing there's equations that they do on the advertiser side beyond just cost versus return, in terms of like how to deem which shows are worth testing into based on their budgets and how much their product costs and all these other things. And at the end of the day, like, an audience of 10,000 people may not just be enough based on their data of how many people convert on average if it's 10,000 people and not 100,000 people, because someone has to buy the product at the end of the day.
Yes, 100,000%. Yeah, you kind of stole a little bit of my thunder there. So I had 2 answers for this one. One was kind of what you just pointed to. From the publisher standpoint, every conversation that I have that starts with a new publisher that's evaluating whether to join the network or not, or if we want us to represent them for ad sales, they say, well, I have this many downloads. I say, great. How many uniques do you have? What's the frequency of the show? So easy math. If you have a weekly show, and you have 100,000 downloads, it's not that 100,000 people are listening to the show. The back of the napkin math would be divide that by the number of episodes per month. And you're always going to have more uniques than that. Traditionally, that's almost always the case, that more people are listening to your show than 25,000. But that will help you get closer to the real answer from the advertiser's point of view, or from the buyer's point of view, where they're going to underwrite that more conservatively and say, yeah, I'm only going to assume we're going to reach maybe 25, 30, 35,000 people in the course of a given month here. And, how many people are listening on a repetitive basis? So they have everyone has their own secret sauce to understand, when have I sort of exhausted the audience for this show from a buyer's perspective, which is why a lot of shows in the sort of 100K, maybe this like the mid 6-figure down to 50K range, campaigns often don't last more than about 3 months, unless it's a proven relationship and you can extend it and not sort of oversaturate the audience. But I would say from the publisher side, the vanity muscles or the vanity numbers is your downloads. So really drill down on activity, understanding your audience, understanding your show specifically. Are you a daily chat show that might get 100,000 downloads a month, but only 2,000 per every episode in a 30-day window? That's going to be very different. What you're going to be able to buy, how you should be approaching any ad read should be very different, because your audience is hearing you 5 times a week. You should be a little more willing to be flexible to the publisher, to the buyer in that case, and accommodate more refreshes for ad reads. The flip side being something you touched on, Alec, was traffic. I think traffic is an underrated metric that institutionally isn't weighted as, from a buyer's perspective, institutionally is not weighted as heavily as it should be. And, when you talk about advertising or buying in other places, you're talking about getting people into top of funnel. Ideally, you want conversions. You want people going all the way through your buying process and signing up, getting data from them, getting their email address, something. But, action item for everyone on the call, test everything. We have worked into our process here. Any ad read we buy, in the process document and workflow for every single ad, we're testing the promo code, the landing pages. We're going through the buying experience and providing feedback on that. Because sometimes the URL isn't up in time. The ad starts on 7/1, it's 7/3, and the URL isn't functioning where they can track the activity that you're driving for them, or the promo code's not working in the way, not working at all, or the way that's been anticipated. So from the buyer's perspective, although conversions are very important, I think traffic is something that is really, really important. And through pixel tracking, you can pixel tracking or promo codes or URLs. That's where I would try to drive the conversation anytime you're talking about a renewal, or you're just checking in and saying, hey, how's it going? How much traffic are we seeing? I would start the questions there rather than how many conversions do you have? So I think that's just an important distinction. And in my experience, it's something that I have to kind of pull out of agencies and buyers, is to get those traffic metrics from them.
Yeah, it's not always super easy to get that information, but it's a really smart way to go about the conversation, because a point that I made earlier is, like, at a certain point, they're on the website, they're now yours to lose as a brand, mm-hmm. right? If your landing page is not converting well, if your offer is not compelling, if it's an expensive product and you can't try it out 30 days risk-free, or, there's a million ways that smart advertisers market their products. And if it's difficult or confusing, or where to put the promo code is basically hidden on the website, something like that. I mean, I've seen it. I've been like, as an advertiser, I go and double check, and I can't even find where to put my podcaster's promo code. Yeah, if I can't find it, a listener can't find it. It's not, attention is expensive. Like, I'm just going to give up. I'm just going to screw it, whatever. So that's a really smart point.
And there's a lot of people way more experienced and smarter than I am that put a ton of time and money into studying some of this stuff. But psychology behind promo codes and coupons and the mentality of a consumer who's driven by that versus someone who is just getting the exposure marketing. But I think at the end of the day, the traffic is the great normalizer. Like between the ad copy that they're either forcing you to read, or the suggestions, they're boxing you into certain copy, that could be a challenge. Of getting, traffic where it just doesn't resonate with the audience for whatever reason. So again, institutionally, we push back on that. And from our process standpoint, we review the copy when it comes in, and we don't just blindly forward it along. We review it. We say, we'll push back if needed. It's rare, but it's always thoughtfully, respectfully. Hey, I think I see what you're going for here for this audience. Do you mind if we do A, B, C, X, Y, Z? And almost always that's really well received. And then they just highlight the few sections that have to be read exactly the way it is, whether it's from a product standpoint or regulation standpoint, or just something that they really want from a branding perspective. So I think that's something to keep in mind too, is that whether it's the actual copy they're asking you to read, the experience for the buyer, or the person, your audience member who's going to turn into a buyer for them. I don't want to name any names because it's a bit disparaging, but there was one campaign we had that required it was a URL. So go to this website. The URL was different than the product name that was being advertised. And on that website, you were forced to watch a 90-second video before you could do anything on the screen and even click out of it, kind of thing. You just had to watch it or close the window altogether. Then you had to click a button to get to the next landing page, which was just sort of like a generic market website that didn't have the product they were talking about and had the different product name on it. It was very confusing. Like, I tried to actually go and buy with the promo code and couldn't do it. So that was sort of the worst case scenario, but just a really great example of why you should just go test it out and make sure that everything's working as expected, and provide some, again, like thoughtful and respectful feedback if you feel it's too challenging or, too many clicks or that sort of thing.
I think that's really smart. Yeah, it's not, there's really smart people working on these problems, but in that case, it's not rocket science. Like, that's a difficult journey as a customer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
I mean, I'm lazy as a customer. Like if someone makes it easy for me to buy, specifically with, like delivery apps or something like that, I'm just pushing like, yeah, sure. I'm tired. Just want it. Um,
yeah.
and some people are really, really good at it. There's some sponsors that I think do a great job of making even the mobile buying experience too, because that's a common, I'm actually glad that just popped in my head. Common problem these days. Most people have a great app or a great, optimized for mobile website on their phone, but if you look at any kind of infinite dial report or anything, people are not listening on their computers. So a lot of time their main company website, it functions perfectly, and that might be where you're testing it. But really, most people are listening on a mobile device or in their car. So I would test it on the phone and see if it's functional there and like how difficult it is. Just looking at the time, I want to jump us ahead. Alec, are there any common mistakes that you see podcasters making when they're delivering sponsored content? Anything that's just an immediate red flag or hits your ear funny?
It's always comes back to like sincerity or authenticity, I think, for specifically for host read campaigns. Podcasters listening to this, like they probably listen to many podcasts and they can hear it. They can hear it when the host is not really that passionate or not really that sold on the product itself. You don't have to use the life insurance product, but you have to be genuinely authentic about how important life insurance is in general. Then, there's nuance to it, but everyone, it's pretty obvious to know when you're just robotically reading a script versus you have that personal connection and you know what you're talking about, and you really do feel like this is a great value for your audience. Like you want your audience to go and try this life insurance company because it's really important to you. And, you've got a story about that, like that kind of stuff, is really important, and your audience knows it right away. And not to mention how much that hurts like the next brand that you work with. And they're like, okay, it's happened again. They're not working with a brand that they don't seem very interested in. And you do that a few more times, and all of a sudden your important relationship, like if you're starting out as a podcaster, all you have is your relationship with your audience. And, not always worth it to work with an advertiser you don't want to work with because they are giving you, some money. It's important to generate revenue for your podcast, but there's a lot of ways to do it. So advertising, maybe not always the right fit for that brand or in general. Another big one is rushing it. I think like lots of podcasters, they get these big scripts, and there's, agencies, brands, professional marketers who write this copy, and it's oftentimes tested and proven to be effective. But what's always more effective is the personalization and stuff. So take your time with it. You don't have to, like you had just said, your ad rep or you should be going to the brand if you're deviating from script in a major way, but you feel it's going to be beneficial for sales. You can go ahead and get approval on that. Send them the ad read. Does this sound good? Everything okay? Like you can do that. Don't ditch the script altogether. You want to make sure you're hitting the call to action, but that body pace, a lot of times the brand's perspective is like, this is host read. Your audience the best. Put it into the voice of your show. Don't make it too don't put on your announcer voice and make it all ad ready, just be authentic. So those are kind of like the mistakes that I see commonly is like, they are just reading from a script top to bottom, saying everything, even saying like, remember to talk about your personal experience with the ad read. Oops, sorry. Like just do a retake, it's really not fair to your brand partner that you're just spending literally 60 seconds of work to do the ad read. It takes a lot more than that to do a successful ad read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Authenticity. And that's different for everybody. One thing that I think is it makes me laugh every time, but if you don't actually research the product in any way, I love publishers who just want to sponsor everything. That's great. Everyone makes more money. Fantastic. But you kind of actually have to understand what it is and not just read the script. So oftentimes there's a very slight change of phrasing, or they will talk about something that actually doesn't quite relate to the product in a certain way, thinking that they understand it. So that would be, it's happened once years ago where we didn't catch it and the buyer heard it first. They're just like, what are you guys doing over there? Like, this is completely not what we're trying to do. And again, I don't want to disparage any particular brand, but that's something that will hit the buyer's ear very funny, and the agency's ear very funny, and that'll get a pretty bad taste in their mouth if you completely sort of miss the mark on what it is. So if it's something that is organically aligned with your audience, then it's very easy and very natural for you. Sometimes you'll have things that may not make sense or aren't directly aligned. I'll just use mattresses because Casper does a lot, or BetterHelp because they're perennial large sponsor. Maybe you're not talking about sleep or mattresses, but it's something as simple as, hey, you're in the market for a mattress, or like, hey, if you're looking for better sleep. And it sort of takes you out of your given relationship, gives you sort of permission to be out of your normal way of speaking and engagement with your audience, to just sort of acknowledge like, hey, I'm talking to you about something that, I am a human and I have these human needs, and this is something that helped me. So you can do the total shifts, but just again, having it be authentic goes a really long way with folks.
Yeah. Even we've seen a lot of success for podcasters say like, if you love the show and you want to support us, supporting our sponsors is one of the best ways to do it. That's like exactly. A true authentic statement that you can make as a podcaster, that, if someone's on the fence about testing out whatever, Liquid IV, and you're their favorite podcast that they listen to 2 times a week, and, they want to support you, and they're like, well, I love Liquid IV, I love the podcast, or I'm interested in Liquid IV, I love the podcast. Like, even that statement alone is, 1, extremely authentic, and 2, it's asking your audience to buy the product through the lens of like, support the show, even if, and it's a great product, and saying stuff like, listen, guys, advertising is really important to our show. It helps us make it free for you every week, saying things like that, and saying like, we only work with sponsors that we're really interested in. Like talking about the fact that there's ads in your show is okay to do, and oftentimes is a helpful bridge when you move from content to ads, because your audience understands, first of all, that you do it. And second of all, it goes back to the authenticity, and it goes back to, the support, right? Your audience oftentimes wants to support you. Sometimes they're looking for ways to support you, and they don't always have one. If you're not running subscriptions, or if, that's an easy example, but, so buying the brands that you work with is a super easy way to do it.
Exactly. Great point. Yeah. All great advice. One other thing that just popped in my head that I think is really important for us to spend a little time on. Get this question all the time, but the timing and placement of ads. I have plenty of opinions, but Alec, do you want to go first?
In terms of timing of the ads, I don't know if there's like a lot of from what I can tell from, the studies that are done by, the like the pixel partners in the industry, like pre-roll or mid-roll, or it kind of seems like it's a wash in terms of what performs better. I think the obvious one is like, don't put a host read ad at the very end of your show where you say like, okay guys, thanks for listening this week, signing off, cue closing music, and then the ad read, like people are closing or ending. They're moving on to the next episode or something. And that ad read is never going to get heard at all. So certainly don't place host read ads in the post roll. But I think pre-roll, mid-roll, early mid-rolls, late pre-rolls, super excellent placements.
Any specific timing or percentages, how far into the episode, how many in certain episodes, any opinions on that?
Yeah, I think it's up to the publisher what makes sense for you, and what you are comfortable with from like a listening experience. If you want to kick the show off with an ad read, it's fine to do. I would recommend doing like a short intro to the episode, then ad read, then content. 2 ad reads back to back, totally fine, but not ideal. 3+ ad reads back to back. You're just not setting yourself up for success if you're doing something like that, because the likelihood is that, if the first, it goes back to, again, what we talked about before, which is like, if they're a good fit for the brand, they're probably going to skip regardless. But if they're interested, they will listen. And if they skip the first ad, they might have been interested in the second ad, but they knew the ad was coming, so they skipped them both. So rotating as a podcaster, rotating which ads come first in the break is a way to mitigate that kind of like skipping problem that can exist. But certainly, like, if you want to charge above average rates or above market rates, a single ad and a single break would be much more valuable in terms of like share of voice for that brand. And it will get listened to more likely than not.
Sure. No, all great points, especially the cycling. That's something that a lot of people miss. So if you want, it just saves you time from a flighting and ad management perspective, as calendar dates shift and the timing of when the ad is supposed to stop shifts. It's very easy to just kind of set it to constantly cycling through, rather than having an ad locked in position 1, locked into position 2, locked into 3, and then having to sort of play Tetris as campaigns onboard and offboard. So great note there. I think there are a few things I generally find helpful. A lot of this is driven by the IAB standards, which effectively is what folks are buying too. So there's standardization in the documents from an agency and a buyer's perspective, that we're selling impressions most of the time. So you're getting X amount of, the buyer's getting X amount of impressions, actual sort of downloads or listens on the show itself. And it has to be from a hosting platform that is IAB compliant. So, a quick boring aside into the contractual nature of some of this stuff. But what that translates to is you actually need the proper quartiles in your episode. So quartiles, you're breaking your episode into 4 chunks. One, the first 25%, the middle 50%, and the last 25%. So if someone is buying a pre-roll, it needs to be in that first 25% of the episode. If someone is buying a mid-roll, it needs to be in that middle 50% of your episode in order to be IAB compliant. Now, there are ways for it won't just automatically shut off, but the spirit of that, it's important to give someone what they're buying. So to be aware of that. And what we typically recommend, just as a starting point, if you're not sure how many ads should I have, where should they be, we typically recommend try not to make pre and mid rolls. If you get up to about 20% of your listening time is a combination of pre and mid rolls, that's a lot, and that's a little burdensome for people. There's a lot of data that suggests that there's a significant drop off after that point. So again, your industry reports that come out every year, that's sort of something that we track. But I think that if you have a roughly 40-ish minute episode or above, 40 to 60, 75-minute episode, which a lot of shows are in that range, we always do we recommend 2 pre-rolls, 4 mid-rolls, but broken into 2 separate locations, and then 2 or 3 post-rolls if you want to have those as well. We find that that's a good way to sort of break up the ad experience, always finding, don't get married to the numbers necessarily of where things are placed, but just go more organically in the conversation or the flow of the show. So at the back end of your production process, really, like as your producer or editor or yourself, as you're doing it, just marking down quickly on a sheet of paper, oh yeah, like here's a good place for an ad break. And that'll save you a lot of time and headache figuring out, where to put things after. So yeah, I guess I just want to make everyone aware of the sort of IAB quartiles and compliance. That's again what a lot of people are actually buying. And don't be afraid too. We have some shows that do 12 ads in an episode. We have some that just do a couple. So it really depends on you, what your goals are. If your goal is to maximize your revenue, you should want to have more ad dollars. But maybe we can talk about this later, but there are other ways to monetize your show as well, besides just the ads that you're placing.
Yeah, and just one quick note on that too, in terms of like ad breaks and the rotations of them. Always run your host read ads first. Don't let a programmatic ad start your ad break and your host read ad is behind it. I think that's a really quick way to make sure your host read ad is not landing on the right ears. Oftentimes, the programmatic ads, they're a bit more of an interruption to the show, right? They could be expecting an ad break, but I think that goes without saying, but maybe it's worth saying now, is like, you want the host read ads, which help support your show in the biggest way financially. You want them to be set up for success, and putting them in the back of an ad break behind a couple of branded, like pre-recorded programmatic ads, is not always the best strategy. I would actually say it's a bad strategy.
Yes, agreed. That is also hosting platform dependent in a sense. So we host all of our shows on Megaphone. Their natural waterfall is to have any host threads run before. So even if
Of
you're
course.
ranking in priority, that's always going to run first. So we find that helpful. I know other platforms do that as well. So this is not an advertisement for Megaphone, although we do love it. But it is a really great point that you want to make sure that whatever settings you have are set up properly so that your host threads are always running before any programmatic. Kind of leads me to my next question for you is when you're talking about host threads and programmatic ads, can you just briefly touch on like general performance and the perception, audience perception for those types of ads?
In terms of performance, a really great host thread ad is typically going to perform better, but a programmatic ad is less expensive. So, there's a trade-off where oftentimes they kind of run equal if they're priced appropriately. So I think host thread being like the bread and butter of your monetization strategy. And from a brand's perspective, a mix is super important too. You want to make sure you're working with the hosts who love your product, who drive sales. And you also want to make sure you're doing some audience targeted buys as well. It's really important to hit the scale that programmatic can get you and the audience targeting capabilities that those buying strategies have. It's kind of two parts of the equation. It's a really important part. A lot of times in podcasting, we do get stuck on the host thread stuff. It's typically, the stronger way to monetize your show in terms of revenue, but programmatic ads work really well for brands, and they're an amazing way to monetize, quote unquote, unsold impressions or just unfilled impressions too.
Right. And especially the back of your catalog. So if your show has a lot of evergreen content and your listening activity is spread pretty evenly across a lot of your catalog, then you're definitely going to want to make sure that you standardize your back catalog. So do an audit. Where are all of my ad markers across my entire catalog? How many do I have? Am I doing 242 in all of these, or do I have a 136 and like 789? Am I all over the place? So just getting a bit of standardization across your whole portfolio, and then setting yourself up to backfill with programmatic. So the way we talk about it is kind of raising your floor from a monetization standpoint. So standardize that back catalog, set those ad markers in the right place with consistent counts, and then turn on your programmatic ads with your exclusions, and so you're not advertising any categories that you don't want. And that should very nicely, you'll see over a couple months, sort of stabilize what your new income floor should be. Then from there, either yourself or your representative is off selling for host thread ads. So your CPM in the programmatic space net to you is probably anywhere from, aggressively maybe $10, but lately it's been closer to, 7, 8, 6, 7, 8 net to the publisher for a CPM. With various fast waterfalls plugged in behind that as well, if you want to do that. And the host threads are 20 to 30. Sometimes the high teens, sometimes above 30 if you have strong demand. So the idea is that you're raising your floor, but then you're also getting that kicker of hopefully pushing your ceiling up too by soliciting these brands, sponsors, agencies, and hopefully winning a couple tests so that you can sort of beef up your overall revenue just from the ad inventory standpoint. Looking at the clock here, let's just jump to our last sort of question here, Alec. Do you have any one or two sort of gold medal actionable steps for podcasters that they can take immediately after this webinar to improve their reads and chances of building a meaningful partnership?
I think one of the things that I mentioned before is to spend more time thinking about how you're going to execute the ad read, thinking about how it relates to your audience. I think a lot of times a podcaster can think like, oh, there's a lot of people listening. I don't want it to be an interruption. Like recording the ad read as if you're just talking to the one person in your audience can be like a helpful like frame to say like, I just want this one person to get the point that like this is a really important like product or service that, if they're a business owner, they need this HR software. Like, and here's why, here's how it worked for me. Record it and listen to it back, listen to, does it sound authentic? At what point did I sound a little robotic? At what point did it not, did the story that I told, not really like land in terms of like narrative flow that I wanted? It's just thinking about it more and thinking about crafting it more impactfully I think is important. Like I said before, you'll hear ad reads. Almost nobody is doing live reads anymore. Live reads are great, but no one's really doing them much anymore. Like you do have the opportunity to like correct any mistakes you make in an ad read. Hearing someone like fumble over a promo code and say like, "Oh, sorry, let me say that again." It's just like it's almost like at a certain point, I guess it can be like endearing, like, "Oh, it is live and they're really doing," but I would say just like spend more time making sure that they're polished and making sure that like you're saying the things you want to say in the way that you want to say them. And, compare it to your script, make sure you're using the right URL. It's a really costly mistake if you mess up the URL and go live, and there's got to be corrections. And yeah, I would just say like, take it very seriously and do a good job the first time. And then, you set yourself up for renewals for sure.
Definitely. Great advice. From my point of view, I think broadly, the sort of one action item, I'll give it a couple bullets underneath it, but the one action item is, if you're not already here, it's a mindset change. So change your mindset towards professionalism and partnership. Maybe not in that order, partnership, then professionalism. So what do I mean by that? It takes a village to get one of these deals done. So, we are representing the publisher. So there's you as the publisher, and then there's me or my team as the intermediary who's working with the agency, who has a bunch of different clients, buyers, sponsors that they're representing right now. So oftentimes, not everyone in that chain is perfect with what they're doing. And if you can, just like with any job you have, think about the other person a little bit. Think about what you're doing upstream and downstream and how that's impacting everybody else in the chain. Make it easy for people to work with you. Make it easy for people to buy and renew with you. Just being thoughtful about what you're doing. So it really is a long-term partnership, and we can get sort of enchanted by the idea of X thousands of dollars that could be coming in. But sometimes the longer term relationship is one that's better, where you maybe you haircut it a little bit and you say like, oh, you know what, we should scale this deal back about 80% on the delivery, because I think we won't be able to deliver that many, or we're going to burn out this sponsor in a couple months. So we'll take 80% off now, but then we'll have three buys throughout the course of the year. But if you kind of ruin that partnership, or you take a green, the stoplight theory, you take that green light and you drag it down to a yellow on your test or your first couple campaigns, it's going to be harder to get back to the green. Whereas if you start off, you get a good test, you stay green, you're a little conservative initially, then you're going to get those renewals and build you're going to build more trust, and you're going to build better, longer partnerships. And ideally you do that, you're going to get more tests than you land. You're probably for every RFP that gets sent out, it's maybe 1 in every 12 to 13 is kind of the ratio we see that you actually win the test or win the deal. But over time, if you've raised your income floor through standardizing your back catalog and getting your programmatic ads in order and VAS plugins in order, then over time, you're going to build 1, 2, 3 sort of longer term repeat sponsors at that higher CPM for the direct ads. And then you're kind of going to be off to the races and off and running. So although I can definitely appreciate that it's challenging as a publisher, somebody who's creating something, and you're putting all your time and energy into making this incredible show, it's a little incongruent sometimes to treat the ad read or that whole process of communication, maybe pushing back on copy, being thoughtful about the ad read that you're doing, thoughtful about the buying process that we touched on. But if you're really just advocating for yourself at the end of the day. So statistically, if you want to look at it, if you win an advertisement on podcasting, you're in the vast minority of shows. It's less than 5% of shows that consistently get any sort of repeat advertising. So just the fact that you got one, you should consider yourself very lucky, and just treat it seriously. Try to be a good partner and a good professional. And everyone in that chain, myself included, we all make mistakes. We all maybe pass an email along a little too quickly sometimes, like it happens. But if everyone there is kind of working with their best interest at heart, with each other's best interest at heart, those are the relationships that you can tell very quickly, oh, this is a good partner. This is maybe someone I don't need to invest all that time in next time because this buyer, for whatever reason, they're not maybe going to be a good partner to me. So it's really protecting your own, energy and time too, so that you're able to identify the good partners and give them more energy. And then the ones that don't really give it back to you, maybe you skip them next time yourself. I just wanted to thank everyone so much for joining. Alec, RedCircle, thank you so much for this opportunity. This is really great. And thanks for everyone for coming. We have our contact information will be available to you if you have any other follow-up questions or want to reach out to us. But thanks so much for your time. And it was great getting to chat with everybody. So take care.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much to Alec Trunley, who is Brand Partnerships Director at RedCircle. You can find him at redcircle.com. And to Dan Christo, COO at the Podglomerate, who you can find on LinkedIn. For more podcast-related news, info, and takes, you can follow me on LinkedIn at Jeff Umbro. Podcast Perspectives is a production of the Podglomerate. If you're looking for help producing, marketing, or monetizing your podcast, you can find us at podglomerate.com, shoot us an email at listen@thepodglomerate.com, or follow us on all socials at Podglomerate Pods. This episode was produced by myself, Jeff Umbro, Chris Boniello, and Jose Roman. Thank you to our marketing team, Joni Deutsch, Madison Richards, Morgan Swift, Aaron Weiss, and a special thank you to Dan Christo.